Hello, hello. Welcome to Tech Ascent, the podcast where we dive into the trends, strategies, and success stories that are reshaping the tech landscape as we know it today. I'm your host, Oliver Clingain. I'm also the founder of Ascension, the premier business development partner within tech. And today, we're joined by a great guest. We're joined by Chris Hale, the founder and CEO of Klear. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Oliver.
No, it's a pleasure to have you on. Would you mind telling the audience a little bit about what you do and what the mission is behind Klear?
Yeah. So Klear is a financial technology platform, and we work with the really important critical suppliers that serve the Fortune 1000 that are typically smaller or medium-sized companies. So about 1/3 of Fortune 1000 spending, which totals $3.5 trillion, it's a very large market, goes to these smaller companies. And it's where a lot of the innovation comes from. And you think of what's going on with the space sector, with energy transition, with defense. Even there's just a lot of new products, a lot of new ideas, a lot of new infrastructure being built. And so we've built a financial technology to help those companies that are delivering that innovation to the enterprise.
Awesome. And with those new products, new ideas, new innovations, how does Klear kind of help them boost that side of the business?
Yeah. So, we like to describe our most important moment in our clients' lives is sort of when they catch the bus, so to speak. They've spent, maybe months, quarters, or even years building a product, taking it to market, doing kind of the first article or the first, unit one, so to speak. And then they get a customer who wants $10 million worth, and they're just not built for that. It's usually a small company. They don't have a mature finance team. They don't have working capital infrastructure to manage that long and cumbersome order to cash cycle. And then generally, Oliver, the bigger your customer, the more difficult this is. So if you're selling to the US government, as an example, through NASA, or you're selling to Tesla, the processes are theirs, right? They get to impose their processes, and you have to figure out how to follow them. And so we build software that helps manage that order to cash cycle. Helps a team collaborate to go from that really important order all the way to final delivery and closing out of the contract. And then we have financial technology solutions in the form of global payments infrastructure, commercial bank accounts, and then trade financing products around capitalizing that order to cash cycle.
Awesome. So it's super versatile, it sounds like. And
Yep.
Being the founder, CEO now of Klear, what challenges did you have kind of getting this company off the ground to get to the point where you are now? I'm sure you faced some adversity along the way, especially in this space.
It's actually our second crack at it. So we did this once under a company called Countable, where we were doing healthcare supply chains into East Africa, and that was hard. That whole market was difficult. Cross-border was difficult. The healthcare distribution cycle and a lot of the big buyers or donors, all that stuff created both bureaucracy and lack of transparency, and it just made it hard. What it did do, though, is taught us how to execute these complex transactions without losing money, and how to manage kind of a complex cross-border transaction structure. And what ultimately happened, we did a lot of good. We helped a lot of people. We improved healthcare in that part of the world, but it was really, really tough to scale for a whole bunch of reasons. COVID came along in 2019. We were trying to run a healthcare supply chain company in Africa from our bedrooms in San Francisco. Wasn't really working that great. And our investors and board was like, Chris, every small company in the United States that sells to a big enterprise needs this product. Let's actually rebuild the platform for this market on top of some more developed rails, integrate some partners that will help us scale, and then kind of re-go to market. So, learned a lot, had to go through that difficult period, had to kind of pivot the company, but growing pretty nicely now that we've kind of found the right market for us.
Nice. And being in a market that with a tool that we'll say it's industry agnostic, you can help a lot of people do a lot of things. How do you go about kind of breaking through the current noise in the tech space? There's so many solutions out there that we'll say promise the world and typically don't deliver. How do you go about kind of breaking through that noise of being somebody that can hold your promises?
Yeah, for us, it's really the supply chain context. There's a lot of financial technology platforms out there that are, better than us for different sectors, right? For if you're in pure SaaS or you're in a marketing business or retail, there are better solutions than Klear for some of those segments. If you're an industry in the supply chain context, moving big items around the world, filling big tickets, building, robotics, aerospace and defense, I mentioned, drones, mobility, energy transition around battery storage. All of these things are like expensive and complicated and require a set of tools and a technology infrastructure that's very different than what's out there. As a result, the majority of our clients to date have come directly from venture capital or private equity referral, where a VC is referring us from their portfolio company to a founder who's gotten to this moment and doesn't know how to solve for it, either because they're not supposed to use the venture equity for things like inventory, right? That's for R&D and marketing and scale. And they're not really in the wheelhouse yet for traditional banks to make a traditional working capital loan. It's really surprising how far down the tracks you have to get to be bank eligible. And so we really help these companies that are, maybe Series A going to Series D scale through that period. Or a lot of our customers have been in business for decades and have kind of figured out an innovative product that now is having them hyperscale. And so those two use cases have become really, really important for us and allowed us to cut through a lot of the noise.
No, awesome. And moving forward, where do you see Klear going? Because obviously the supply chain is only getting more complex. How are you guys navigating a growing space?
Yeah, one of the things that we do that's different is we have a securitization infrastructure, which means that we, the capital that we deploy into these supply chains to help these smaller companies scale is directly sourced from institutional investors through a securitization. It's a bit of a complex back end for a fintech. What it means is we can get very large pools of capital at very competitive pricing. And the reason that matters is we're starting to see some channels turn on. So historically, we've been kind of bottoms up, working with these small companies one at a time. We're now starting to see enterprise customers that want their supply chain strengthened coming to us and saying, hey, can you just run this for me? And that's a great fit because we get a lot of scale, we get a lot of consistency in the business process, but most importantly, there's a match between our investor demand in terms of size and the credit quality and the scale of the opportunity that's coming through those channels.
Nice. And Chris, with this, who are you typically speaking with in these businesses?
In the big ones, yeah. In the big companies, it could be chief procurement officer, it could be CFO. Sometimes it's even like a board referral, because a lot of these companies, like, it's an integrated problem where you have supplier development, you have finance, you have supply chain, and there's been solutions out there that have done this in the past that have been kind of not really like end-to-end consequential. They've solved like one small part of the problem, and so that synthesis is part of the challenge of making the sale, but also really powerful when you get through it because you have multiple counterparties that are interested. Inside the small companies, it's typically the board, CEO, or CFO. It's the person responsible for getting the other side, capturing the revenue, kind of sticking the landing with that big customer. Oftentimes, the user of the platform might be more of a VP of finance or an operations person, but typically the sales process is through the C-suite.
Gotcha. No, super interesting. And the reason I ask is because just in the space, in the tech space in general, there's a gap around prospect education, especially when it comes to innovative platforms like Klear. Sometimes those conversations can be a little complex. How do you go about navigating your sales process so when you're speaking to prospects, they have a full understanding of what you offer?
Yeah, so, given the fact that a lot of our leads and inbounds are coming through referral, it's really important that we start at the right place. As a fintech, sometimes people come with their hair on fire saying, I need money. And it's a uncomfortable conversation because we often are saying to them, look, the reason you need it is because you can't get it. And the reason you can't get it is your business processes aren't eligible right? So we have to go through this process where we take them back and say, look, this is a capability, this is a skill set we're going to build across your team to actually map and model and manage this really important financial cycle inside the business. And that's super important, and it's a big part of kind of prospect education is, you're gonna level up here. It's not that you just need to run around, bang on more doors, and hope somebody says yes. It's, you need to develop this skill set, this capability inside your company, and if you do, it'll actually make the rest of the way easier and frankly protect your ownership and your dilution as a founder.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And yourself being a founder, going through this journey, we mentioned some of the lessons you've learned. This is your second go around kind of in this market. What have you kind of learned along the way in terms of mindset that allows you to keep going, especially when you had the step back and reapproach? What lessons have you learned kind of along the way in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, a big one for me is kind of moderation. You have violent swings in kind of how well things are going, how poorly they're going any given day, or levels of uncertainty, or sort of things that seem like a sure thing fell through, or seem like they were dead and come back to life. And so you really have to just kind of really love the problem and be able to kind of focus on the problem and put your head down and do the work every day. Still working hard, still selling as hard as you can, still striving for the big wins. But the ability to influence them on a day-to-day basis is really driven by how effective you are at solving customer problems. And that's always something you can come back to, right? The customer's always there, and the customer's always got problems for you to solve. So kind of, I would say, embracing that part of the process, and letting some of the noise just kind of swirl, and putting my head down and getting to work has been something that I've had to learn, because I've always wanted to fix the biggest problem, and sometimes the biggest problem needs a minute, and it might even be solved by solving one of these small ones with a customer who will give you the key to unlock the big one.
Right. Yeah. You got to solve 4 problems before you can solve the 5th one, and then maybe even solving 2, 3, and 4 could be the one that solves problem number 6 that doesn't exist yet. Who knows? It is just a big curve. No, I appreciate that. And Chris, as you keep going through Klear, we've kind of talked about some of the lessons you've learned, challenges you faced. What's the future hold? What's the goals? What's the mission?
Yeah, so there's a lot that needs to be built, both here in the United States and around the world. There's a big focus with good reason around developing kind of the American manufacturing base, and kind of a lot of geopolitical reasons to build that out and do things like reshore supply chains. And we expect that we will play an increasingly active role in that universe. And it's really fun, because in doing that, we interface with these super innovative companies and these brilliant founding teams that have figured out, like nanomaterials that can do things that nothing could ever do before, or, how to launch satellites into space, or how to beam solar energy down from the atmosphere, or full energy transition around, data centers and renewables, and combining the two. It's just really, really fun stuff to help these teams figure out. And I think, as we continue to grow, we kind of narrow our focus, to be honest with you, and really zero in on these big problems and these brilliant teams that are solving them. Because the amount of capital that needs to be put to work in a very responsible way, in a very repeatable way, with a high level of governance and a high level of transparency, is enormous. And the more we can find ourselves in the middle of that, the better we'll be.
Awesome. And say there's a listener out there right now, they're coming from the supply chain space, for example. If you could tell them one thing, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that supply chain liquidity is far more important than you might realize. I think there's a lot of problems around schedule risk, around fulfillment, around supplier resiliency that are actually misdiagnosed. And it's much more related to liquidity and capitalization and sort of payments and moving money fast. God, every day we wake up and there's like another crisis around, some shipping lane or some currency or some who knows what, tariffs. And I couldn't imagine having to respond to all of that without kind of the level of level of agility and transparency that we hope to deliver to our customers.
Awesome, awesome. And Chris, we've had a fantastic conversation so far. I really appreciate you coming on. If there was one thing you could share with the people listening, what would that one thing be?
Well, if the audience is a lot of founders, I mean, keep going. That's what I would always tell people is, one of the biggest differences between, I think, successful founders and not is those moments. And you just kind of, like I said, figure out how to help somebody, figure out how to solve a problem, and keep going.
I love it. I love it. And Chris, that's all I got for you today. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing what you guys are doing with Klear. I'm sure the audience does as well. And for everybody listening, I'll make sure Chris and Klear are tagged down in the descriptions. Chris, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Oliver.